Hey friends, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Leslie from Joleelee Creations, and today we're going to be making the Starling Messenger bag by Bagstock Designs. I have made this pattern 3 times in the last few weeks. I always make one as a tester bag before I film a video, and it came out amazing. I was super proud of it. I loved it. I was so excited to show it to you. So I started sewing up my second bag for you for the video, and I lost half of my footage. So about halfway through I realized that my footage was missing, and I had to make the hard decision to either carry on with a different bag or completely start over. I put it in timeout for a few days and I finished it, and today I came back and I refilmed my third bag. So I'm absolutely in love with this pattern to begin with, but now I've gotten to know it really well over the last few days, and I'm super excited to sew it up with you. All of the bags I sewed up this week were a wax canvas base. I did interface with foam that I basted in the seam allowance and then trimmed out the excess foam. This one has a cotton flap with 1 layer of fleece, and I lined the inside with a cotton as well. I interfaced that with a woven interfacing, and I really liked that combination. For the one that I made today, I did sew this one up with 2 layers of the self-adhesive fleece from Fabric Therapy in the flap, and I feel like it gave it a little bit more structure. On the back side, I trimmed it out of the seam allowance, and then on the front side, it has it in the seam allowance like the pattern calls for. Everything else was exactly the same. This one as well is a cotton woven interior, and the flap is cotton woven, and I did just a basic strap. This one is waxed canvas on the flap and waxed canvas on the base, and I used Luxe nylon on the inside, which is a bit thicker than waterproof canvas, and it did make it a little bit thicker in the seams, but it wasn't too bad. The only thing I would change on this one is I would do heavier interfacing on the flap. So I'd either do foam or the 2 layers of fleece like I did on the one today. Even with a cotton flap, the wax canvas is still a little bit thinner, so I think it's pretty comparable and would do the same thing for that. The bag itself has a lot of pockets. We have a full zipper pocket on the back. Underneath the flap, we have a full slip pocket. On the inside, we have a slip pocket divided into 2 compartments with pin slots and a zipper pocket. And on the other side, we have a padded tablet sleeve. So it fits an iPad, a small tablet, or small computer just fine, and it's padded for safety. This bag has quite a bit of prep work that we can do before we even get started sewing. I am basting on my foam interfacing at 1/4 inch around all the pieces that require foam. She adds 1/4 inch so that you can go in and you can cut the foam out of the seam allowance if needed. We're going to work with our bottom flap, which is our lining piece, and it is the one upside down. I mentioned earlier that I did add self-adhesive fusible fleece to this flap as well, and I just trimmed it out of the seam allowance. I used the pattern pieces to make the marks for my snaps, and I'm adding those now. Now we can move on to our front slip pocket, and I'm adding our magnetic snaps to this piece as well. This piece doesn't have foam or interfacing, so I'm using a small piece of the self-adhesive fleece just for some stability on the back pieces of this wax canvas. I also need to add my nameplate, and I have measured that about 2.5 inches up from the bottom, and I'm just making my marks and adding that nameplate. To keep the prongs from rubbing through the material, I'm adding the TheraFuse self-adhesive fleece to the back of the prong. For the base, I used Decaville Heavy cut out of the seam allowances, and I did use a heat press to adhere that. I will say that using the heat press, it did leave a little bit of waxy residue, so I do recommend using a Teflon sheet to keep your heat press safe. Additionally, I have gone ahead and I have basted down my foam to the bottom on all 4 sides, and now I am drawing a line on both long edges 3/4 of an inch in, and drawing and stitching down a seam just for aesthetics and to keep that interfacing in place. And that's about it for prep work. We have our flat pieces. I have interfaced both with the self-adhesive fleece from Fabric Therapy. On the exterior piece, I did it all the way to the edge. On the interior lining piece, which is the upside down part that has our snaps, I added the fleece just for a little bit of extra stability, but I did cut it out of the seam allowance. So we're going to put these right sides together, clip into place, and sew along the edge at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, leaving the top open to turn. We need to use our pinking shears or notch our curves around the corner. And trim our regular seam allowance down to about 1/4 of an inch. Turn our flap inside out, or right side out. Poke our corners out, run our hand along the bottom to really push the seams out. And since this is cotton, you can take it to the iron and press it really well. If you're using a vinyl, maybe take a seam roller, roll out your seams. And we need to top stitch along the edge around the base and the sides at 1/8 of an inch. And base the top close. We now want to work with our front slip pocket, and before I continue on, now that my flap is completely assembled, I want to make sure the snaps line up with my flap and my front pocket so that everything will fit nice once it's complete. So since that works together, I'm going to take my front slip pocket and my front slip pocket lining. We're going to go right sides together, clipping the top edge we want to sew the curved edge with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. We need to flip the lining piece back behind the front pocket, and we're going to press these seams back behind. And I do like to roll it just a little bit behind so that we don't see that lining fabric behind our pocket. Push out that flat edge. Once we have that pocket pulled down out of the way, we can top stitch along the curved edge at 1/8 of an inch. With our front slip pocket complete, we need to take our exterior front panel, line up the bottom curved edges, clip into place, make sure everything's lined up. And baste this slip pocket onto the main panel. Put those pieces away for now. We want to grab our zipper tape, our zipper pull, our exterior back top, our exterior back bottom, and our back pocket lining piece. Let's start with our exterior bottom and our zipper tape. We're going to line it up along the top straight edge and baste into place. Grab our lining piece and lay it wrong sides together onto our zipper, making a zipper sandwich with our exterior bottom piece. And we need to stitch down the zipper at 3/8 of an inch. Flip over our lining so that our exterior main body and our lining are wrong sides together, and that will be the start of our inside pocket. So we're just going to press everything down away from the zipper on the interior, flip it over on the same for the exterior. And top stitch along the top edge of our fabric just below our zipper at 1/8 of an inch. Take our lining piece, fold it back up, right sides together to the top edge of our zipper. So now we are going to be creating a pocket, lining up the edges of our fabric and the top edge of that zipper. So we're lining up the sides and the top of our zipper. Clip into place. And we want to baste our lining to our zipper at 1/8 of an inch. Take your exterior base piece, and we have this one backed with foam, and it has one edge that doesn't have foam. that's the edge we want to line up with the edge of our zipper. So we're going to put it face down with the piece of the top panel without the foam right up against the edge of that zipper. And we want to stitch that down at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Leave your lining piece down behind your zipper and flip up the top panel and push that down away from your zipper towards the top. And we need to top stitch at 1/8 of an inch along the top of our zipper, and we'll be stitching through that foam. So we want to make sure that foam sits right there inside of that top stitching. So we have our back panel with our top piece, our bottom piece, and we need to add our zipper pull. Separate your zipper teeth, making a note of which one is on the top. Slide the right side in first, slide the left side in, adjust the teeth, and slide on our pull. Now that our pull is on, we need to baste around the bottom panel of our exterior so that we catch the lining of our interior pocket. So now we have our zipper pull on. We need to baste down the sides so that we can close this zipper pocket on the side. And you can start at your zipper and backstitch over your zipper to secure it. And I like to go from the top to the bottom just so that it pushes that pocket nice and tight, so you may have to flip it over to the back side to do that. We need to trim off any excess zippers and anything that may hang out of the side. Now we want to work with our gusset. So I have my gusset base, my 2 gusset pieces, my 2 connectors, and my D-ring hardware. We can't use double-sided tape with wax canvas. It just doesn't really stick very well. So I want to start by just folding my edges to the center and add a couple clips. If you have the longer metal clips, that works really well to get all the way across for these. And the same for our other connector. Fold to the center. And then now we can top stitch down the sides of each of our connectors at 1/8 of an inch. take one of your D-rings, slide it on, and we're going to fold our tab about halfway down and meet our other tab in the center. So you should have your tab with your D-ring at the top and our raw edges ends met in the middle, and then add a clip to hold those in place. If you have any raw edge strings, make sure we clean those up. And hold that into place. And we'll do the same for the other. Slide our D-ring on, fold our tab to the middle, meet the other side, add our clips to secure. Now we want to stitch a line as close as we can to this D-ring hardware, keeping it straight and in place. We don't want to pull too hard because it will move the back, but we do need to keep it pulled tight, nice and straight. So I'm going to drop my needle right into the line of stitching, stitch across, Now we want to find the centers of our gusset panel pieces. Mark the tops and the bottoms. And while I'm here, I'm going to find the center on my gusset panel, or the base as well. Since it has Decaville Heavy, I just want to push the edges together, crease it, find the center here as well. Set that aside. And we're going to take our ruler and we want to mark 1.5 inches down from the top edge. So I'm lining up my center mark with my ruler, lining up the top edge. Lightly with my chalk pencil, I'm going to draw a line going 1/2 inch to one side of the center and 1/2 inch to the other side of the center, since we know that it's a 1-inch connector. So now I can take my ruler and I'm going to line up the 1/2 inch mark with that center line. And right at the line where we started, marked our 1.5 inches down, I'm going to draw just another slight mark down. That way it'll give me an edge to line up our tab. So now I have a small box. I can take our tab or connector that we made, and I'm going to line it up right in that top box that we just marked. So that will hold it in place, and I'm going to stitch along that top mark that we just did, down the sides, across the bottom, and back up the side. If you pull these threads, it will pull the loop to the back side, and then you will have your loose threads on the back. Rub away your chalk marks and repeat on the other side. So we're going to take our base, we are going to put it face down to one side of our gusset, line up the edges and our center points, and sew together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Fold our seam allowance over to the base and top stitch along the base side of the bottom. So that's why I didn't stitch across the bottom of the base when we did down the sides, because we have our top stitching along the bottom of the gusset as well. So it kind of creates that box. Now take our other gusset piece, line it up against the other raw edge of our base bottom. And sew together at a 1/2 inch. Then fold everything towards our base bottom. And top stitch along the base edge. So now we have our completed gusset. Set that aside. With our center gusset complete now, we can take our back body panel and our front panel pocket, and we're going to attach our gusset. I'm going to work with the front panel first, and I'm going to line up the center point of our base on the gusset to the center mark on our front panel pocket. And add a clip. I like to work from the bottom center first. Bring up our side gusset to match the top. Add clips to hold that in place, and then work my way back down the side. That way it gives us a little bit more room to ease in that gusset corner. I don't like to make snips until the very end because you want to just make sure they're in the right spots. So I'm going to go back to the other side, match up my top edge for my gusset and my main body panel. Clip into place, and then we're going to work down the side. Meeting up with this bottom corner, we can kind of work it in a little bit better once we just have the corner left. And it fits pretty good. And just go back and check and adjust this corner as needed. And everything fits pretty well. So with the front panel and our gusset clipped on, I'm going to begin stitching at the top, and I like to stitch with my gusset side up. I'm going to stitch down at a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. As we get down closer to the bottom, we have some really thick seams. So as we remove the clips, I can use my hemostats to grab the layers and pull them close to the edge to keep them together. Double check your inside seams to make sure you caught all your corners and there aren't any crazy wrinkles or ripples. And now we want to add the back panel with our zipper. So we're going to line up our center pieces. I just realized this back piece is supposed to have foam underneath this pocket on the back panel. I'm just going to rip out these basting stitches and slide the piece of foam in. That'll be fine. Okay, so now we're going to take our back panel, put it face down, line up our center marks, add our clips, now we're going to flip it over with our gusset side up and stitch down at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. need to trim our seam allowances down, but I do like to leave the top inch or so down so that it's easier to butterfly the seams whenever we assemble the bag. So I'm just going to trim right to that basting stitch that we did when we first basted everything together. Okay, now we need to turn our exterior right side out. So I'm just going to start by pushing the corners. With the foam, it's pretty easy. You don't have to worry about too much. Just make sure you're not turning into your pocket on the front, or it'll be kind of funky. Push out the corners. Make sure everything looks good. Push those seams out, kind of roll them together so they'll keep their shape. So we have our back. Let me see if I can zoom you out a little. We have our back with our zipper. So we just want to make sure that everything is secure there. And then our front, we have our slip pocket and then our side connectors. So we'll set that aside for now and we'll work on our interior. I want to start with our interior by working on our flap. So I'm going to take our flat pieces, put them right sides together, clip them into place, and I'm going to stitch around at 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving the top open so we can turn it. I did round the corners on my tab. I just wanted to give it a little bit more stylized look. Take our pinking shears and round our corners and turn our flap right side out. Now we need to top stitch around the edge of our flap at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. We want to now work with our tablet sleeves. You should have one lining piece with just your regular interfacing and one lining piece with the foam. We're going to place those right sides together. And stitch those together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Flip so the lining pieces are wrong sides together. We want to make sure these raw edges line up. So I'm going to clip those in place. And press the seam at the top. We want the foam piece to be in the front and then the plain lining piece on the back side. So we're going to top stitch with that foam side on top along the top edge and then leave the sides open for now so we can add our snaps for our tab. And I do like to roll this back so that we don't see that back edge of the lining and top stitch along the top. Now we want to add our Velcro or our snaps. I really like the look of fashion snaps, the metal snaps. So I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch up on my flap, and I'm going to find the center. So it looks like it's 2 inches wide, so I'm going to go 1 inch down, line that up, and find my center mark. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Let's find the top center of this. Line that up with our center bottom. And I'm going to find the center point about a 1/2 inch from the top finished edge. And because it calls for Velcro, I just want to measure and make sure that will work with these snaps. So I'm just laying my pocket onto my lining. Line up this to the top, and I do want to bring that down a little bit further. So let's go 1 inch down from the top instead of a 1/2 inch. Find my center. We'll go 1 inch down. And since we're 2 inches wide, let's go a 1/2 inch over on each side of our line, and that's where we will put our snaps. So the same thing here, 1/2 inch over, 1/2 inch over. I'm going to go through both pieces of fabric, and I don't want a huge hole, so I'm just going to use my awl to poke a hole through, or my stiletto, right in the center, all the way through both sides. And then I can add my snap. So I'm going to make a little bit bigger hole since it doesn't want to go. And then that just goes with the press. Then we have our snaps. We'll do the other hole. There we have our 2 snaps on our flap. So we need to add the others to our pocket for our tablet. So we just want to fold the back side up to make sure that we don't punch through both sides of that. Just want to make sure our snaps are going to line up to our lines. They should, because we measured everything. Grab my other pieces for the bottom and change out my dies. See if I roll this side up, if I can get my punch through here. post through the back side, slide it onto our press. And then we'll do the other side. And then before we stitch everything together, we need to make sure our snaps line up. Yep, and then just clean off our chalk mark. While we have our snap and bottom piece out, we want to take our main body lining, add our... I'm actually going to baste this bottom down first because I want to pull that really tight so that it doesn't have any excess on the inside of the pocket. So baste these two layers together first. I just want it nice and snug. There's a little bit of extra foam, so we just want to trim that off. Okay, now we can baste this pocket onto our lining piece. Line up our corners. And then I'm going to want to find the center of my lining first. Just to make sure. Find the lining, the center of my tab. And then we'll line those up. We just want to make sure it was straight, even though it looked straight. And baste those on. So one side of the lining is complete. Let's go on to the other side. We'll work with our slip pocket pieces next. So you should have two lining pieces with just woven interfacing, no fleece or foam. I'm going to put these right sides together, lining up the top edges. And stitch together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Flip our pockets wrong sides together, pushing our seams apart, and lining up our bottom edges. If you have a preference on which piece you would like to be, just make sure they're both right side up. And again, I like to push the back side just a hair behind so we don't see that. And we're going to top stitch along the top folded edge at 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to baste around the bottom, hold everything together. Need to find the center of the bottom and the top. Just don't clip the top center because we've already stitched that closed. So I'm going to mark that with my chalk pencil. And we need to mark a center line to divide our pocket. So I'm going to line it up with my center mark on the top, center on the bottom. And mark a center line. Gonna add 2 pin pockets. So 1 1 inch to the right side and 1 1 inch to the left side. It's a 2-inch ruler, so I can just spin it around and mark the other side. So we have our 3 dividing lines. Take your remaining main body lining, match up our slip pocket to the bottom edge, clip into place, and then we're going to top stitch down our 3 lines that we drew. And baste down around the rest of the bottom and side. Next, we need to add our zipper pocket to our lining side with our slip pocket. So our zipper is going to go here. We need our 2 zipper lining pieces and our zipper. We're going to take one of our zipper lining pieces and I'm going to draw a zipper box 1 inch down from the bottom and 1 inch down from the sides. I'm going to use this zipper guide from More Me Know. So this is 1 inch from the side and 1 inch from the top. So I'm going to draw my box for my zipper, going almost to the end, but I know this guide is, or template is a little bit bigger than what we need. So now I'm going to move this side and line it up on this corner. So that will give me my 1 inch down and 1 inch over. So just line up my box that we already drew and then add my end mark. And that's going to give me my zipper box, 1 inch down, 1 inch over from the sides. Next, we want to take our lining piece, make sure our centers are marked. And we want to place this lining, zipper lining piece that we just drew with our box 1 inch down, 1.5 inches down from the top edge. So essentially our box will be 2.5 inches down. So we'll do 1.5 inches here and 1 inch on our pocket. So the easiest way for me is to take my ruler, line it up on the center line, the 1.5 inch mark, chalk line all the way across. You know it's hard to see on the camera. We have our center fold, and I'm going to crease this as well on my pocket. And I can line that up along my chalk line that I just drew, lining up my center marks. So that'll keep my box straight. And we're about 2.5 inches down. And we're going to stitch around our zipper box. When I start, I don't like to start in the corners because when you back stitch, it'll make it a little bit thicker. So I start a few inches in from the side. Next, we need to draw a center line down the middle of our box, about 1/2 inch from the end, and then draw a small triangle to connect from the corners to that line. If you have a small cutting mat, use that, and we're going to cut along the triangles in the corner, getting as close as we can to the stitches, and that'll help prevent puckering, and cut all the way down. You can also use scissors, just really personal preference, and sometimes I do either. We just want to get as close to those stitches as we can, without cutting them, of course. And then we can turn our pocket inside out. I like to crease the top and the bottom and the sides of our pocket first. It just helps it lay a little bit better. Since we're using cotton on this one, you can also take it to the iron and press it well. If you have some puckers in the corners, just check and make sure that it is trimmed as close to the stitching as you can on the other side when we trimmed to our window. Sometimes just a little bit more of a snip can get that pucker to go away. If you have a material that you can't iron, or you just don't want to iron, or whatever the case may be, you can use a little bit of masking tape to hold this up out of the way and keep it a little bit neater for when we add our zipper. So we want to take our zipper and we need to add our zipper pull. So again, separate our teeth, the right side on, the left side on, and slide that on. And we're going to add double-sided tape to the edges of our zipper tape at the very bottom. one more thing that'll make it easier when we finish our bag is to draw a line a 1/2 inch or a little bit more. It doesn't really matter which size, or how far you draw your line up, as long as it's consistent on both pieces. But we're going to draw a line on the back side of our lining pocket. From there, we're going to add another piece of double-sided tape right along that bottom edge. Remove the tape and fold this raw edge bottom tape up to meet that line. Okay, so you should have your edge folded over our zipper pocket here. We need to remove the tape on the top side of our zipper, making sure we know which way we want our zipper to go. So I'm actually pulled the bottom off because I want my zipper to go closing on the left side, but that's okay. So we're going to take our zipper, lay our overlay hole right on top of our zipper tape, lining up evenly all the way across and making our zipper teeth line up in the middle of that window. Pull our zipper pull down into our window, pull the top part back towards us, remove the top row of double-sided tape. So if you did it the top row first, then you'll be peeling off the bottom row. And gently lay the fabric back into its natural position. You shouldn't need to pull or manipulate it too much, as our creases should already be there. And then just make sure our zipper is lined up on the end and is centered on both sides. So now you have your zipper in the facing, and when you flip it over, you should have your zipper on the back and 1/2 of your pocket. Now we need to stitch on our zipper. So now we want to either stitch around the box or at least mark your pivot points, which I like to do on every bag because it just makes it easier for me. So I'm just taking a chalk pencil, I'm using my ruler to mark an 1/8 inch around the border so that I have a pivot point mark as I go around. It just helps me stay a little bit more consistent. If you're not going to backstitch, pull your thread tails long. And I like to start at the bottom right corner, just a personal preference. I do like to use a hump jumper when I'm going over my zipper, just so it doesn't push it off center. Pull our thread tails to the back. Make sure we have them all on this side and tie it in a knot. When using this method of adding a zipper pocket and you pull the threads through, you have them visible here, and I'm always worried that my zipper is going to get stuck on the threads in the bag. So I take a hand needle and I poke it between the pocket and the lining. So it's just coming out here. And then I add all 4 of my threads. Into the eyelet. And I pull the thread tails through to behind the pocket. That way they're not going to get stuck in the zipper. So you can just pull your knot, and your knot will either should bury itself right between that lining and the zipper tape. So now our thread tails come out underneath that pocket instead of hanging out on the zipper. So I'm going to remove these 2 pieces of tape that were holding that down for us. We want to take our remaining pocket, line it up with the top and the sides. And we need to fold up this other pocket side, and sometimes it can become uneven while we're stitching, so that's why I save it for now. So just take a piece of double-sided tape and line it along the very edge. Peel that up, and then now we can just fold to meet that edge of the other pocket. So once you have that, we want to leave this hole open so that we can turn the bag through it, but we need to stitch down the sides and the top at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it's easier for me if I put my lining face up. If you pull these little threads out to the side, they'll get stuck in your stitching and a little bit more security. And I'm just going to stitch this at a 1/4 inch. So now the same thing for this side. I'm going to start at the bottom, make sure our pockets line up. And when I get to the top, I'm going to pivot, roll the top down, and stitch across the top just above the zipper. And trim any excess zipper that hangs off the side of your pockets. So now our other interior side piece is complete with our zipper pocket and our slip pockets. Just like we did for the exterior, we need to assemble our gusset. So we have our gusset side piece and our gusset bottom piece, and we need to lay them right sides together. And we want to sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Fold the seam towards the base and top stitch along on the base side. And we'll repeat the same for the other end. Face down, line up our edges, and stitch together. Open up the gusset, our seam towards the base, and top stitch along the base edge. We'll find the centers of the top of the gusset on both sides. And we need to find the center point of the base. So line up our fold edges on both sides. Now let's take our 2 lining panels and we need to add our gusset. But we want to make sure that when we are adding our gusset to the zipper side that we leave it open to turn the entire bag through the zipper pocket, and then we'll finish the gusset through the zipper pocket. So we're going to start with our tablet pocket first. Line up our gusset center with the bottom center, just like we did the exterior. We're going to clip into place along the bottom. Bring up the edges of the gusset to the top. Clip into place, and then work our way back down to the bottom. And then we can add a couple small snips into our gusset. We have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or just a little bit bigger than a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the base, so we have some room to add some snips to make that corner fit perfect. Same thing for the other side. Bring the gusset to match the top of the lining edge. We're right sides together and clip along the side. Add a couple snips into our gusset curve. And then now we will begin stitching. We will start at a 1/2 inch and then graduate down to 3/4 of an inch all the way around the side, and then back up to a 1/2 inch at the other side of the gusset. Starting at the top, we're going to start at a 1/2 inch and go for about an inch or so. And now we need to trim off the excess, going around the bottom. Now let's add our remaining lining piece face down, center our bottom gusset. And even though we're not going to sew this side all the way shut, I'm still going to clip it to keep everything in place. So do across the bottom, line up our gusset sides. And the same on the other side. Meet the top. And into the corner. Add a couple of snips if we need to in the gusset. With everything clipped on the gusset, I'm going to start at the top, just like we did on the other side. And as soon as I get around the curve, I'm going to stop and backstitch to leave a hole to open. A hole open to turn. So right about that seam on the bottom where our base connects is where I stopped and backstitched. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I'm going to skip over the bottom, open it, leave an opening, and begin stitching on this side. Okay, so now we need to trim our gusset on the other side. So again, I'm going to start just below the top area, come around the corner, but I do want to stop just before where we stopped our back stitching, because we're going to need that to finish the bag. So just inside the top, so just inside the stitching here, cut off the corner and come up the side. So now our lining is complete. We just need to check everything on the inside, make sure everything looks good. And before we can assemble the bag, we need to attach our flap to the back. So we're going to unsnap, flip it over so our snap side is up. Let me see if I can zoom out here. So our snap side is out facing us. Line up that center mark and clip into place. Now we need to baste that flap down. So very carefully we're going to lift back the front of the bag and baste that flap down onto the back side of the panel. So now we have our flap basted onto our back panel. Okay, so now we have our exterior. We have our flap attached. Make sure that your snaps are on the right side of your flap. Fold that back over. We have our lining. We have it wrong sides out, so when you open it up, you have the inside. And we want to line up the back flap tab with the back of our flap, and we want to stick and shove our exterior inside our lining. So very carefully, I mean, it doesn't even have to be that careful, but we want to shove our exterior into the lining. Open up our exterior and you should have everything like this. We're going to take our seams and our center point marks and we're going to line them up together, clipping everything in place. Butterfly the seams where we can, which means open them up wide and flat. So we have my seam butterflied open on both sides and lined up to that side seam. And we're going to add a clip. Line up our center points, and then the same for this side seam. Flip around to the other side. Make sure your D-rings are pushed down so they're not poking up. They won't get into the way and hit the foot when we're going around the bag. Clip in the middle. Line up our side seams. And these seams on the side are pretty important because that's what's going to line up on the lining and the exterior. So we really want to keep those as close as we can, just for aesthetics. Butterfly open that side seam. And now we want to line up our middles. So we're going to come to the middle, add a couple clips. Same for this side. Add clip in the middle. And then work our way around, stretching out that interior and lining to match. So our bag should look like this, completely clipped around. Now we're going to take the bag and we want to stitch around at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now we want to take our bag and we're going to pull it through the bottom gusset hole that we left open. While we're here, I want to unzip my zipper pocket on the inside, and we left this pocket open. We can pull the base of our lining and our gusset through the bottom of that pocket. So it looks kind of a mess, but we have the seam here where we stopped stitching and where we stopped stitching over here. Pull that out a little bit more and pull that snug. We can line up the edges of our lining and clip that in place. So now we need to stitch our 5/8 across the bottom of that to close up our gusset hole. And we'll trim the seam allowance off the bottom to about 1/4 of an inch. So now we can tuck that back inside, and then we have our zipper pocket left. Can tuck in our corners. And clip. Where we folded the edges down of the pocket earlier, it's going to make a nice, easy, flat surface for us to stitch. Stuff our zipper pocket back into our lining. And then push the rest of the lining back in, rolling all the seams down into the bag. Where some of the thicker seams meet up on the side, you can take your key fob pliers, even with an industrial, and I still like to squeeze these seams down just to flatten them a little. So I'm going to keep rolling these edges down, add a couple clips as I go. And we do want to push our snap flap on the inside for our tablet. We want that to be down when we top stitch. So I am going to give that a little squeeze just to kind of keep that down nice and flat on the inside. I'm going to top stitch with our flap up, so we want to make sure that that's all situated correctly with our flap up. Starting with my thread tails long, I'm going to start in the back seam going towards the front. I like to stitch across my front first. I don't know why, it's just something that I've always done. And I'm going to drop my needle right in that side seam. Make sure I'm on top stitch length, which I like to top stitch out of 4. And here we go. If you guys are still hanging out with me while I make this bag, I really appreciate it. Your support means the world to me and helps keep me going and this channel growing. I really hope that you join me on Facebook in my group Creating with Joleelee, and if this video has helped you in any way, please make sure to like it before you leave. As we go to the back, I'm going to use my hand to hold the lining tight since I can't add clips, and pull the flap out with my other hand. So now I can guide this hand, and I have my right hand underneath holding the lining tight. So we are coming up on the flap on the inside, so I want to make sure that I go up and over that so that it doesn't pinch underneath my foot on the underneath side. Coming back around to where we started, I want to walk it into the same hole that we started in that side seam and leave our tails long. I want to hand thread these long tails to the inner part of the seam. So the needle is going right up through that seam. I'm going to add these 2 threads from the exterior and pull them through to the center of that seam. And now I want to do the same thing for these lining threads. So I'm going to go up through that center seam so that all 4 threads can come together in the middle, and tie those threads off together. Once we've tied them off a few times, we want to take our needle, go straight down into the hole and out through our lining a couple inches down. Put our threads through the needle. And pull them out through the lining. Pull the threads out through the middle, down low, and the threads will tuck back into the bag. I made a simple webbing strap for this bag, and that completes it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave your comment below and let me know which bag is your favorite. I can't wait to see your makes, and I hope you tag me in them. See you next video. Bye!